north of Scotland later. The far north will be cloudier and breezier with rain at times on Saturday, but elsewhere will be dry with plenty of sunny spells and temperatures peaking around 26 to 29 Celsius in the south. The rain in northern Scotland will sink a little further south across Scotland during the afternoon, and spells of rain are possible in Northern Ireland.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
This is Sky News Tonight. Coming up, our panel of experts will answer your questions about the extreme heat coming our way and what we can do about it. Welcome back. Well, let's get more now on that red weather warning from the Met Office and the declaration of a national emergency as the UK faces record temperatures next week. We've been asking you for your questions throughout the day, and let's get some answers for you now. I'm joined by Alex Deacon, a meteorologist at the Met Office, alongside Rose Gallagher, a practising nurse who is professional lead for infection prevention and control at the Royal College of Nursing, and Susan Schofield, a former director of the Cabinet Office's Civil Contingencies Secretariat. Good evening to you all. Thanks very much indeed for being with us tonight for what is, for all of us, an unprecedented time, isn't it? We've got a range of questions from right around the country. So what I'll do is I'll put the relevant question to the relevant expert. Sometimes maybe two of you can answer the same question too for us. So I'll let you know who it's addressed to as well. So let's start with a question from George then. He's asking, why are we declaring a national emergency when other countries in warmer climates that we visit for holiday seem to cope OK? Susan Schofield, I'll put that to you.
OK, well, I think it's because we need to think through early the consequences, and declaring that national emergency make us do that thing. So we're prepared for the worst, but we really hope it won't happen. We've got rather a lot going on at the moment, and the knock-on effects from one department to another are not always obvious, and you need to think them through.
I'll put that to you as well, Rose. Do you think we're just kind of built differently in the UK and that's why we're not able to cope as well?
Well, the temperatures that we're expecting to see are extreme for the United Kingdom. So we don't live our lives such as those in the Mediterranean countries, for example, who know and adapt to life with high temperatures throughout the summer. So this is a really clear warning to us to be careful with our behaviour and respect nature for the few days where the temperatures are going to be really high.
OK, question from Rob. How likely are we to get power cuts and travel be impacted? Susan Schofield, another one for you, really.
Yes, well, I suppose that's what I was trying to say earlier. It's precisely planning to avoid the need to do it. Now, some of the impacts may not be immediately obvious. Transport, for example, road rails will be familiar, don't like these sorts of high temperatures. So how we adapt to travel safely in those types of it is exactly the reason you forward plan.
So what is it that we need to do then? What is the adaptation that needs to take place?
Well, in that case, I think I've heard that trains will be driving more slowly, for example. But in each case, it needs to be thought through, ideally, so there isn't then something that does cause power cuts and stoppages, and those kind of things.
OK, are we safe to work in these temperatures? Steve L is asking that. I'm going to bring in Alex Deakin, meteorologist at the Met Office. Good to have you with us tonight. I'll ask you that first before we go to Rose for it as well. How safe are we?
Well, I actually quite like to answer that first question about infrastructure and how people cope with these kind of temperatures in other countries. You're not comparing like with like. The infrastructure in this country is not ready to cope with the kind of temperatures that we're talking about, unprecedented values. When you go on holiday, you're kind of preparing for it, your body's preparing for it, and the infrastructure in those countries is set up. You have air conditioning, and it's really those nighttime temperatures as well as the daytime temperatures that are going to cause the problems, because people won't be able to sleep as well. And if your body doesn't get that rest, then it really struggles to cope in the high temperatures. In terms of how hot is it to be able to work, well, that is a question for each employer to look at. These are unprecedented temperatures. Every workplace is different, so it's up to the employer to make sure that the people are safe in their work environment. But these are unprecedented temperatures, and we're going to see extremes, and they are going to cause serious issues.
Yeah, I'm going to put that back to you, Susan Schofield, because I was kind of expecting that kind of answer from you as well. I mean, if you think about it, when we do go abroad, we do see, higher ceilings, different shaped buildings. They have adapted. Presumably, we haven't adapted fast enough to the fact that climate's getting
we haven't needed to. But I very much agree with Rose's point. There are things we can do to adapt our behaviour immediately. Things like, close your curtains during the day, arguably in some cases your windows, but open them up at night. And that way you get a better night's sleep. I mean, we are where we are at the moment with our infrastructure, but that's precisely why we need to be thinking through. This is going to be more typical for the future. Are there changes we need to make? And similarly, we've been talking about this in making our homes more fuel efficient, for example. So adding to that work that's always underway, but these are further dimensions that maybe we have factored into our planning.
Rose Gallagher, as a nurse, how are we safe to work in these temperatures? And it's not just all of us out here, it's also members of the NHS who are going to be under extreme pressure too, aren't they?
They are indeed. I think I'd like to start by saying that employers have known and know now that these high temperatures are coming. So they should be putting in place plans now to support their workers and keep them safe. You know, heat is really dangerous. We should be really, really clear about how heat can affect individuals and how we need to adapt our work, if we can, to keep ourselves safe and cool. So for the NHS, there will be healthcare professionals, including nurses and midwives, that will be working in hospitals, but also travelling in their cars, out in community settings, caring for patients in their homes. So they are going to need to stay well hydrated. They're going to need their employers to put in place actions to ensure they have adequate breaks. But that's very hard when the hospitals are full and demand is so high. For other employers, of course, they may be able to adapt when people go to work. You may be able to start earlier. You may potentially be able to work at home and avoid travel if your job can do that and it's maybe cooler at home. For other people, it will be cooler in the office, so they may decide to go into work because it's cooler. But all of us need to wear light clothing, we need to drink adequately, and we need to take it easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Some good advice there. I'm sure everyone here in the studio is definitely grateful for the aircon when we come into work. We're unusually happier to be at work these days than to be at home. OK, Alex, I'm going to bring you back in because we've got a question from Bethany who's asking, will this weather get worse in the years to come?
Heat waves are getting more severe, getting more ferocious. They're lasting longer and temperatures are rising. And that's all part of climate change. We are going to see these temperatures more frequently, and we are going to see heat waves, as I say, becoming more ferocious. What we're talking about next week is an absolute extreme. But heat waves are, as I say, becoming longer lived. There's lots and lots of evidence around that, and temperatures are getting higher. So it is something we're going to need to be prepared for. And part of the Met Office is to look at the science, feed that into government, and to help with the infrastructure around that. So I think it is something we need to be aware of. And yeah, we do need to prepare for it.
This is an interesting one. How do pregnant women work during the extreme heat? I mean, gosh, I know. So I have a number of friends who are pregnant at the moment. They tell me they feel like incubators. So Rose Gallagher, how do they cope in the heat?
Well, first of all, pregnant women, whether you're in the early or the late stages, need to adapt over the next few days. So pregnant women are at greater risk of becoming dehydrated. Their bodies are working harder because they are pregnant. So they need to make sure that they drink plenty. They should be aware that they are more susceptible to heat and the risks of dehydration. So stay in the shade if you can, talk to your employer, make adjustments if you can. If you can work from home, or if you're not working, then see if you can take a nap. And if you're concerned, talk to your midwife. That's the advice that we would give.
Can I ask, I know that a lot of people have recommended to me, and I've done it when I've worked in hot countries, you run cold water on your wrist because that's where your pulse is. Does that work? Is that an old wives' tale? I mean, it works for me. Maybe it's in my head.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I carried a pregnancy in a hot country as well. It was 28 degrees at night when I was heavily pregnant. And it really was about having very loose clothing, keeping the bedroom curtains closed. As you said, spraying water on your face actually can make you feel more comfortable. It's important, though, that people around you, if you have partners living with you or relatives, that they keep an eye out for you. We all need to keep an eye out for each other during this hot spell, whether it's elderly relatives or vulnerable people such as pregnant women or those with long-term conditions. So be prepared.
OK. We've got so many more questions from right around the country to get through. We'll carry on after the break. But first, before we go to a break, we've got one last one from Hayden, who hasn't disclosed his age, but he's asking, will people still have to go to school? Susan, I'm going to ask you that. I know that a number of schools, on a very serious note, have actually said they're going to close or telling kids to stay at home next week. How do you think the government should handle this?
Well, I think, again, that in principle, put in place measures that make that not unnecessary would be ideal. But in individual cases, the building might be of such a nature, and actually we've had quite a lot of experience with COVID in this sort of way, that means actually they can't make the changes that others can. That's why it's important not only to have the sort of the national approach, but also the local is very important, and individual businesses, individual schools may not all come up with the same answer.
OK, stay with us. We're going to get through a lot more questions, but you are watching Sky News. Coming up, more of your questions and answers from the panel about the warning. And a reminder, it is going to be extremely hot weather. We have a national emergency declared.
Beautiful hysteria here in the final hours of Boris Johnson's premiership.
He just lets himself rip for the great British public, and this is the result.
I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world.
He wants to tell people stories, and he is utterly cavalier with the facts.
Thank you.
You never apologise, you never admit mistakes. Ultimately, you know, you get caught.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Our street! Our street! Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything you know, his memories is all gone.
In almost every corner, this town has been completely destroyed by the fire. I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
Trump out of the White House.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
I get that that's where the media likes to go.
No, it's not. It's where many of the people we've talked to here like to go.
I report on the biggest stories from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians.
You say it's all fabrication, what's happening in Bucha?
Destroyed my nation.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet. Yeah, I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem. A very violent series of confrontations here. What do you think of ISIS?
Everybody here knows the truth of ISIS.
I'm Dan Whitehead, and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent. From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region.
Welcome back. We're answering your questions about the extreme weather heading to the UK. Well, we're already in the midst of it, aren't we? Which has triggered a red warning from the Met Office for next week. Let's talk to our panel of experts. Alex Deakin, meteorologist, Susan Schofield, former director of the Cabinet Office's Civil Contingencies Secretariat, and Rose Gallagher, who's a nurse and public health expert from the Royal College of Nursing. Alex Deakin, I want to come to you now because, of course, whenever we have extreme weather, whether that's snow and blizzards and storms and hurricanes, or like we're experiencing the UK's first ever red alert and national emergency, we talk about climate change. Is this an example of climate change? Is this what it's happening right now?
A natural climate always has variabilities. We've had hot spells in the past, but what is absolutely clear is that these hot spells, these heat waves are becoming more intense and more frequent. The science is absolutely clear that climate change has its fingerprints all over this current hot spell. When it's over, we'll do what's called an attribution study, and we'll be able to put a number to it, how much more likely it was because of human-induced climate change than if we hadn't had it. What we know at this stage is that 40 degrees Celsius is now 10 times more likely in the UK than it would be under a naturally varying climate, so one that humans haven't influenced. So yes, we are going to experience these kind of heat waves more and more frequently, and there will be, as I say, a study done straight afterwards. I'm pretty confident we'll say there's a high likelihood that this is down to human-induced climate change. We will have had a hot spell. We're always going to see hot spells, but this is that extra layer. We'll talk about 1 degree of warming, and people don't quite understand why we're then talking about these extremes of temperatures. But that 1 to 1 degree is a global average, and you get local variations, and you're just pushing the boundaries. You're pushing the extremes. So we're at that extreme end with the temperatures we're looking at, and because of climate change, we've just taken it on that extra notch, and that's why we're talking about record-breaking temperatures.
That's really interesting. I didn't realise you had to study afterwards to work out whether this was impacted by the introduction of what humans are doing, and therefore global warming.
Well, that's just to get the numbers, right? So to get the exact numbers, so we know exactly how hot it's got. It could be 37, it could be 39, or how long the heat wave is going to last. So we need the stats in so that you can then run the computer models to compare and contrast. That's why you kind of wait for the numbers. But the science is clear. Heat waves are becoming more and more frequent. They're becoming more intense, and they're lasting longer. So every heat wave has some kind of element of human-induced climate change. It'll just be a question of putting the numbers on once we've got the final temperatures. But again, just want to stress, whether we get to 41 or 39, people get hung up on the numbers. Me as a meteorologist, I do as well. And certainly in the media, we get kind of fascinated by the numbers. But it's kind of irrelevant what we're talking about here. A lot of health impacts will be severe, whether it's 37 or 41. It's that longevity of those top temperatures and the nighttime temperatures as well, because we could break records in terms of highest ever minimum. So it's that longevity and it's the intensity of the heat, whether we get, as I say, to 41 or 37.
Right. OK. Well, on that, we've had a question, Rose Gallagher, from a viewer saying, I have a toddler who is unwell with a temperature. How can I best keep her cool in this hot weather?
Well, it's really hard because children don't understand when we ask them to sit still always because it's hot. But there are some basic things that we can all do to keep toddlers cool. So first of all, dress them in cool clothing and offer them perhaps cool baths or showers if you don't have a bath throughout the day. Really important that they stay well hydrated, so keep an eye on their nappies if they're in nappies, or make sure that they're going to the toilet. And if they're old enough, then perhaps a fan might be comforting for them. I think it's really important to be flexible in terms of what you do throughout the day, and obviously if you have to go out, make sure they wear a hat and try and avoid hot cars. But one of the most important things is to actually be aware of the signs of heat exhaustion in people, and that includes children. Children can become floppy, they can become quite sleepy and hard to rouse. If that happens, you should seek urgent medical advice.
Thank you for that. It's really worrying, isn't it? Susan Schofield, we've had a question asking, would the government in a red warning ever consider shutting the country down to prevent any incidents from people requiring medical aid or hospitalisation?
Well, in a sense, never say never, but that's precisely why you do your planning, to make sure that you don't get, and that fundamentally, as close you can get to business as normal continues. That's the whole reason for doing emergency planning and being prepared for the extreme. That's precisely what one doesn't want to have to do. Now, the other thing, and I very much echo what colleagues are saying, is therefore what government also needs to do, and which the national red crisis triggers, is give people good ideas of what they might do and encourage every family, every business, there's also the national business, to have its thinking done and its plans and its hats in place or, whatever. Have those options ready and available. So
what are the top 3 or 4 bullet points you would give that people should do? I mean, we're saying there's a national emergency, we're saying there's a heat wave, we're saying it's dangerous to vulnerable and people who aren't vulnerable. What should they be thinking of doing?
Well, I think stay inside if you possibly can. Work from home, as we've heard, if you possibly can. If you do need to go out, make sure you're properly dressed. And the point about staying hydrated, I think, is a really, really central one. So these are all quite simple things that we can all do.
It's interesting, Rose, there's also the flip side to staying hydrated, isn't there, where you can drink too much water and remove the salts in your body and stuff. So what's the right amount of water?
Well, heat exhaustion occurs when your body's not able to cool down. So you've basically become dehydrated, very simply put. So you should be drinking at least a glass of water an hour, possibly more, depending on what you're doing and the environment that you're in. So as nurses, we encourage people when they go to the toilet, if they've got dark urine, it means you're probably not drinking enough. But you're right, we don't want people drinking litres and litres of water and washing out the salts in their bodies.
OK,
so,
very quickly, we've got 1 minute left. We've got one last question from Rich, who's saying, how best can you prevent sunburn if you get burnt? What's the best way to relieve the effects? Rose.
I would say loose clothing, obviously, make sure your skin is covered and use a high factor sun cream.
OK, that's brilliant. Thanks very much indeed. We've got all the way through that. Alex, sorry, did you have something to say there? My producer's saying that, Alex, you might have something to say.
Just the best way to avoid sunburn is to avoid the sun at those peak times. UV levels are going to be very high in places this weekend, so avoid those times, 11 till 3. And if you do have to go outside during those peak times, walk in the shade, wear a wide-brimmed hat. The best way is to avoid, exposing your skin to the sun at all.
Absolutely.
And
Alex
dogs
Deakin,
can get it as well, that get sunburn.
Sorry, Susan?
Dogs can get sunburn, I understand, also. So
yes,
think about
protect your pets too. Exactly, absolutely. So Susan Schofield, Alex Deakin, Rose Gallagher, thanks very much indeed for answering questions from our viewers tonight. Good to have you with us. Stay safe.
Thank you.
OK, let's take a look at the weather in detail for you now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the heat's building over the UK and Ireland this weekend with a risk of dangerous and record-breaking temperatures early next week, as we've been discussing. Many places will have a fine end to Friday, with any showers becoming confined to the northeast of England and